You're listening to IceBreakers, the podcast exploring all things Canadian and Eurasian, business, culture, and personalities. The series is produced by CERBA, the Canada-Eurasia-Russia Business Association. We're a non-profit supporting trade, investment, and good relations between Canada and the countries of Eurasia. I'm your host, Nathan Hunt, one of the founders of CERBA and former chairman of the National Board. I invite you to tune in regularly for valuable insights relating to the region.
Hello, everybody. We're hosting today Nathan Hunt, a graduate of Yale University, summa cum laude nonetheless, former Russian director of Canadian meat and dairy traders, Ronald A. Chisholm Limited. Nathan is one of the founders of CERBA and has chaired its Moscow chapter for over 2 decades. Last but not the least, Nathan serves as host for the IceBreakers podcast. I'm Alex Schifrin, founder of LPAD, an advertising agency, and a friend of Nathan's for over 25 years now. We're turning the tables on him today, making him the interviewee, and I will be doing the interrogating. Nathan, welcome to your own podcast.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Well, listen, I'll do my best to be analog, Nathan. So I have known you for over 25 years, and I kind of wanted to set the context for today's conversation. I think the theme today is reinvention. And interestingly, I've watched you and Russia, our home for many years, reinvent itself over the last 2.5 decades. And I think that you've had many adventures and many reinventions of your own that seem to, I wouldn't say parallel, but happen on or around the same time that the country finds itself in a period of reinvention. Let's do this. I'm going to mention a period in time where I think there was a reinvention taking place in Russia. And it'd be great to hear about what you were doing at that time and how you had reinvented yourself from your previous self around there. What do you think?
That's a wicked approach. Let's go to it.
Okay. The time is the early 90s, 91 to 93. 91, Yeltsin had created an independent Russia. By 92, we were seeing hyperinflation of over 2,000%, which I believe went well into 93. So there was a formation and a reinvention post-hyperinflation that was happening in the early 90s. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing then and how you were transforming your life.
Well, I will. And before that, though, I'll even turn the tables and tell you that I was in Russia in the 1980s. I'm not the only one. There are plenty of us that were here. And back then, it was the Soviet Union. And I met a pretty little girl. She became my girlfriend, and we dated, and we ran from the KGB. We actually had the spy stories that you maybe read about, and it seems far-fetched. That couldn't have happened in real life. Yes, it did. It happened to my lovely little bride and me. And we lived with the black market, and we lived in the shadows, and we got rid of a tail. One time I had a friend advise me on how to drop a KGB tail, and we did all these kind of cloak and dagger things. Okay, not every day, but I have some great stories from the 80s. I suppose we don't have time to go through them all. It's fun to note, however, that the price of a cassette tape, a blank cassette tape in the West was $1 at the time, and you could sell them for 10 rubles in Russia. So you could get an exchange rate of 1 to 10 just by bringing in blank cassette tapes. I learned that early on, and we lived a life of luxury in the 80s, I can tell you.
So you're speculating on cassette tapes and Levi's jeans at the time.
Yes, but Levi's jeans gave you a bad rate. Levi's jeans cost you $20 in the U.S. in the 1980s, and you could only sell them for, let's say 50 rubles in Russia. Not a very interesting rate.
Professionally, what were you doing at that time in the early 90s?
So, yes, I was working for a consulting firm called Summit Limited. They were consulting for food companies that wanted to do business in Russia. Their clients included Heinz ketchup, Heinz baby food. They included Land O'Lakes dairy products, Stokely, a regional vegetable packer, and a few others. One of their clients was the U.S. Meat Export Federation, a trade union of companies that exported meat all over the world, primarily to Asia, but they were really interested in Russia.
You know, I seem to recall a story of a chicken purchase gone afoul.
Oh, dear. I completely forgot about that. And that's certainly something that should be in my biography. Yes, we always think of the Russians, being nefarious and devious and deceiving their poor Western partners. Well, my very first trade deal was exactly the opposite. I had a bunch of Russians that were impressed with me, government officials. They believed in me. They wanted to buy chicken. and they transferred $1 million almost. It was what was it? It was $862,000, I think, to me to buy 1,000 tons of chicken. And I promptly took the money and transferred it to somebody whose fax number I had. We didn't have the internet back then. And two lovely ladies that supposedly were going to ship the chicken to me. And somehow I never got the chicken. And boy, oh boy, was I red when I met with those government officials for most of the year of 1994. I remember that. I was blushing and hemming and hawing and explaining. And I finally flew to Cleveland, where the sisters were based. There was two sisters. And I was astounded to find a fly-by-night operation, just two women working out of their basement, not very well-to-do, I have to say. And it became clear early on that they had taken my $1 million and just spent it on other stuff. You can read about it on the internet if you Google my name and chicken, I think. That was a scary time.
I think when I first met you, I saw something about that ongoing case on Reuters, and that was my first introduction to you.
Yeah, and I could say, you say, how does it all end? Well, I ended up borrowing the $1 million. Unfortunately, I had a family that could back me up on that. Yes, I borrowed the $1 million. I paid the money back to the Russians. One of the Russian guys, and these are not gangsters, but one of the guys says, you need to threaten these ladies. If it's really the ladies and not you, just tell them that you're going to take one of their little fingers, and that will do the trick. They'll start shipping the chicken then. And I thought to myself, is that a veiled threat to me? I don't know. I wasn't sure. But I did borrow the money. I did ship the chicken. And in the end, I earned it all back in the trade later. And the two ladies, we went to the FBI with my lawyers. I gave them a bunch of material, and I thought I'd never hear back from them. It was almost 2 years later. I got a call from the Cleveland FBI. It said, we're going to trial. Are you ready to testify? And I was shocked. I had heard nothing for 2 years. And without me paying any bribes, as you might have to do in some countries of the world, without me begging anybody to take action, the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation simply, jumped on the case and put these two ladies in jail. And you won't believe this, but they've been in and out of jail for most of their lives. And I know when they're back in jail because I keep getting checks from the U.S. government because of the judgment. When they're in jail, they earn money, and I get a little bit of their salary.
Wow, that's amazing. So, as you transitioned out of the USMEF, what were you doing then? Well, how did you, it's interesting that you are from Nebraska, you're an American, you had come to Russia representing American interests, but at some point you kind of pivoted to a Canadian angle. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, sure. The USMEF consists of many companies, some of them European, some of them American, some of them Canadian. Companies from all over the world. The one thing they have in common is they export U.S. meat. They sell U.S. meat somewhere. And guess what? Most of those companies, they're not all producers of meat, like Tyson or Conagra. Those are producers, but a lot of them are traders. They're offices that don't make anything. They don't have any factories. They don't have any farms. They buy, sell, buy, sell. And it's not 5 of them. It's more like 105 of the members of USMEF. I don't know. That's probably too many. It's probably 55 are traders. And those traders may be based in Canada. They may be based in Denmark. They may be based in the Netherlands. And I got a very generous offer from a Canadian company that wanted me to go work for them. And I was mulling about it, kind of helping them do deals for about 3 or 4 months. And it was clear that this would be a conflict of interest. I mean, I can't really represent the interests of all the association's members and work on the side for one company. And so I was in that conflict for just a couple months before I finally resigned. And I told the USMEF that I don't want to be in this conflicted position. I'm going to go work for the Canadians.
This started when? When did you make the journey?
1995. I introduced the Canadians to the largest account, the company Chisholm, to the largest account that they may have known in their history. Maybe not, I don't know. But in any case, we were all very happy with the friendship that we put together with the Cherkizova meat factory. We became very close with the owners of Cherkizova, the founders of Cherkizova. We helped them even in personal matters, helping them with banking matters, helping them with university abroad, helping with immigration matters. We're close to this day, very close to this day. I won't name names on the broadcast because it's inappropriate, but we're very close to the founders this day. And I will say we were this close to taking them public. We had hired the best of the best investment advisors, and we were about to take them public in 1998 when the first severe financial crisis hit. And all of our work went down the tubes. The Cherkizova group, you might know, eventually did go public in 2005, but we can't claim any credit for that because different people did that.
And that's kind of the next big reinvention that Russia went through is after the collapse of 1998, we saw Boris Yeltsin step down in 1999, bring on his replacement, a then unknown Vladimir Putin, and step into what became a boom of the early to mid 2000s. A big reinvention happening in the late 90s, early 2000s. Can you talk a little bit about what you were doing at that time?
I can tell you we were pioneering new sources of meat for the Russian Federation. You know, for instance, Australia and New Zealand, their meat has always been the top of the market, too expensive for a market like Russia. Well, guess what? It wasn't. We traveled to Australia. We went with some producers. We traveled to New Zealand. Somebody asked me once if I ever feared for my life while I was in Russia. I know what they were thinking. And the answer is I did fear for my life once, but it wasn't while I was in Russia. It was while I was in New Zealand. And the owner of the big meat factory who was with us said, I have to make that plane in Auckland. I have to be back to Auckland for my 5:00 flight. The only problem was there was a hurricane. There was a hurricane. It was Hurricane Drena, Drena. Look it up, happening in New Zealand at that time. And we had 24 hours to get him up to his plane. And there were not any, we would hire a private plane with pleasure, but no private pilots were willing to fly in a hurricane. And we found one bush pilot who was absolutely mad. And he agreed to take us on. And we jumped in that plane. And I have never had a rougher ride in my life. I honestly feared for my life. And the end of the story is, yes, we made it. Yes, we flew out of Auckland. But I don't advise it, friends. I don't advise it.
How long was that flight?
That was 1 hour, and it was the longest hour I have ever endured. I can tell you, it was from the middle of the North Island to the tip of the North Island. You know, if you know geography, Auckland is at the tip, and we were at Lake what is it called, Rotorua, in the middle. It was a 1 hour flight, but it was just up and down and bumpy. The plane, you know, if you weren't wearing a seatbelt, we would have had broken vertebrae. Believe me.
So early 2000s. The proto-CERBA was called CBAR at that time, the Canadian Business Association in Russia. And I was a member of that, and I recall you were one of the founders of that. Can you talk a little bit about the inception of this?
That's interesting because I call myself a founder of CERBA. On the books, I was one, but I was not a founder of CBAR. That association existed before me. I was simply invited to be on the board because they wanted somebody in the food trade. They said, we don't have any ag or food guy. And of course, I mentioned the fact that I'm not really Canadian. Is that appropriate for me to be on the board? They said, yeah, you're in the Canadian food trade. And we were exporting a lot of Canadian meat. Yes, Chisholm exported other meat, U.S. meat, South American meat, European meat. We sold a lot of meat. As I told you, Australia and New Zealand, but we also sold a huge amount of Canadian meat, specifically Canadian pork. And Canadian pork was very popular in Russia, right up until it was banned August 6th, 2014. Until that very day, we were selling that pork hand over fist. It constituted 1/3 of Canada's total exports to Russia. That's another story. I'm already off topic. I apologize, but we had a sales guy who did most of our sales. We entrusted the trade to him, and I just kind of managed things from above while he did the actual visiting of the clients and the sales. And he was a Russian, and we applied for a visa, and he got refused his visa. And it was just a technicality. But I remember writing the letter, asking his case to be reviewed, saying, here is a man that probably single-handedly manages 1/3 of Canada's exports to Russia. Maybe we could give him a visa. End of the story. Yes, he got his visa. So that has a happy ending. And it wasn't stupidity. He just was missing some form or something. I don't know.
But it's also an interesting time. Wasn't that the time when arguably Russia favored Canada? Certainly more so than today.
That is exactly one of the points I wanted to make. You know, Canada has always been kind of the neutral country, the non-America, if you will. You know, the U.S. is always the great rival, but Canada was kind of a third way. Certainly under Jean Chrétien, that was the case. Less so with later governments. We won't name names, but in any case, Canada always got a fair shake from Russia, and the Russians were always trying to do little favors for Canada, almost only because it wasn't the U.S. We would get things approved for the meat trade that the Americans couldn't get and the Europeans couldn't get. And Canada's small, it's not a big deal, and Canada's not really a threat, and the Canadians play hockey with us. Canada and Russia have a lot in common, and that wasn't lost on the national veterinarians. We would get special treatment. Not always. Yes, we had problems, we had disputes, but I would say on the whole of things, over the last 25 years, I have to say we got better treatment than did the USA, than did the European Union. And a perfect example of that is the year 2014, when many US factories were banned. The EU was shut down entirely because of a more or less political dispute, and Canadian pork was flowing into the country at prices that nobody had ever seen. That was our best year ever. If it hadn't been for the political dispute around Crimea, Chisholm would have had a wonderful 2014. We had a wonderful half of 2014, let's put it that way.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Lada import story?
Oh, yes. Well, Ronald A. Chisholm, long before I was involved with the company, we're talking 1970s here, so I would have been in grade school, they were the first company to import Lada automobiles from the Soviet Union to Canada. And of course, they wouldn't take them in the USA. They did take them in Canada. And they build it. Mr. Chisholm explained it to me. They build it as the first throwaway car. If it breaks, you can just throw it away and get another one because they were so cheap. They were selling them for less than 2,000 Canadian, I think. And of course, you can't just sell cars. You have to have service for the cars. So they did set up some service stations. They, set up a contract with somebody. The trouble is they would ask for parts. They would order parts from the Soviet Union, and they would get what they didn't order. They say, we need left front fenders. Those are the ones that tend to get busted up first. Left front fenders. They're the ones, that hit in a collision. And they would get a bunch of right rear fenders. They got a whole shipload of right rear fenders when they asked for left front fenders. And they said, well, isn't that wonderful? Unfortunately, we can't snap these on because they don't fit. But that all went on wonderful until the invasion by the Soviet Union of Afghanistan. And then, as we recall, there were protests, anti-Soviet protests all around the world. And somebody even dropped a Lada off of a cliff, I believe, in some sort of demonstration of anger. And that business had to be shut down. But Tim Chisholm pioneered the business.
I had no idea. I did not know. I would think that if you got a shipment of right rear fenders instead of left front fenders, the opportunity was there. What would be to ask people to drive backwards instead, no?
You're thinking out of the box, Alex. That's why I like you.
I'm thinking out of the box, Nathan.
Now, I'm going to throw another story out there that's way off topic, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Tim Chisholm, the guy I just told you about, who brought the first Lada automobiles, he was also a partner with Elvis Presley in the
what?
Yes, in the Memphis football franchise, the American Football League. They had the U.S. Football League, it was called, not the NFL, but the USFL in the 1970s. And he was a partner, and he actually knew, and he met with Elvis, and they had dinner together many times. He was a friend of Elvis, and he tells many Elvis stories. But now we're so far off topic, I'm going to shut up, and we'll get back to the topic at hand.
Well, can you talk a little bit about the inception of CERBA? What the idea was behind that, and really how you and three others set that up?
That's a great question because it's a great story. The fact is, nobody wanted it to start with. There were Canada-Russia business clubs in Moscow, ours. There was one in Toronto called the CRBF, run by Don Whalen. There was one in Calgary, run by Paul Dreger. The CEEIA. They all had different names. We all had different member rosters. Some companies were members in all three of them, but they were all kind of locally focused. So if you're in Calgary, you're going to be part of the Calgary group. If you're in Moscow, you'll be part of the Moscow group. And the business was starting to boom so strongly in the early 2000s that one of the groups, and it was the Calgary group, said, you know what, we're going to open a Moscow office. And we didn't like that one bit. We didn't like that at all. We said, wait. You have your Calgary members. You keep doing your little thing in Calgary. If you need any help in Moscow, we're here. We will cooperate with you. But no, you're not going to open a damn Moscow office. We're going to do that. And of course, they told us, well, guess what? We can do whatever the hell we want. You aren't our father. You aren't our parent. If we want to open a Moscow office, we'll do that. And there was a little bit of tension for about a month or two or three, and until we had a conference call. Of course, we didn't have Zoom back then. We didn't even have Skype back then, but we had conference calls. And we had a conference call between me as head of the Moscow group and Paul Dreger as head of the Calgary group. And he said, look, we don't have to do this in a belligerent manner. Let's just merge. Hey, let's just merge. Your members will be our members, and our members will be your members. And we didn't even invite Toronto at the time. But we went half the way down the road in discussing this, and the Toronto people got wind of it. And somebody called me from Toronto saying, "What's this I'm hearing about a merger? You guys aren't leaving us out of this thing." And so, okay, we decided we would include the Toronto people. And there wasn't much happening in Montreal then, but there was a nascent organization. They called what did they call themselves? The Quebec Russia Business Council, QRBC or Business Forum or something. And Piers Cumberledge from Bombardier at the time. He was, he by the way, is a fabulous orator, an excellent person. I love him to death. And he was kind of the glue, I would say, that put us all together, that forced us to put our differences aside, said, "Gentlemen, let's be gentlemen about this." And gentlewoman, there was a very strong woman from the Calgary chapter that was Eva Shafarova, fabulous lady that was really managing things from her side. And Calgary was the driver in the process. But Piers was the glue, I would say, that put it all together. You know, we in Moscow finally acceded. Don Whalen and his group in Toronto finally agreed. We had fierce discussions over the name. Would the name include Russia? Would it not include Russia? Would Russia be at the beginning or the end? To the point of it, I think people were ready to hire killers to settle this issue. But somehow we settled on the name CERBA. And the real kicker, the real hard part was a month after the merger, as we said, we registered a new organization in Canada. There were 4 founders. I was one of them, and Don was one, and Piers was one, and who else? Paul Dreger was one. So the 4 of us were the official founders of this new corporation. So that's why I call myself a founder of CERBA. But we had to transfer money. That was the big sticker. And all of us had tens of thousands of dollars on our bank accounts. And we all agreed that Calgary is going to be the bourse. They're going to be the money strings. And so we had to close our bank accounts and ship everything out to Calgary. And boy, that took a leap of faith. And there were people on our board at the time that said, "I don't know, this is a good idea. This is all the money we've saved up over the last 10 years. And we're shipping out to Calgary." And I said, "Well, we're all in the same boat now." And I can't tell you how well it has worked out. I mean, really, if I look back at everything I've done in my life, CERBA is by far the thing I'm most proud of. We have created a lean, mean organization. We have a very lean leadership structure. We don't take a lot of money. If you look at people that maybe take 10% of the dues or 40% of the budget for salaries, I don't know what our percentage is, but I know that we are very lean. And we get a lot of leadership out of volunteers, and we put on good program. More than one ambassador has said that we punch above our weight in Russia and Eurasia. Under my management, when I was national chair of the board, we expanded into Kazakhstan. We expanded into Western Canada. We opened a chapter in Vancouver. And I'm just proud to death of everything that we have done. And even, I can't take credit for it all. Everybody has done well. Piers Cumberledge before me, Don Whalen before him, Lou Namovsky after me, Gilles Breton now. All of those national chairmen have done fabulous in expanding, even in very difficult times, expanding and shoring up the organization to the point where when people ask me, "How's life going?" I say, "Well, my business is dead, but CERBA's chugging along. We're doing just fine."
So Nathan, having learned nothing trading chicken in the early 90s, you thought that a prudent decision would be to send money randomly to a city in the middle of Canada. Yet this time, it was the right decision.
This time it was the right decision. Nobody ended up in prison as a result, as far as I know.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to see Canada talking about unity in this example versus separation. So I think you've done wonders with this. It was clearly the right thing to do in a flyaway success.
I think it was a success. Thank you.
Let's fast forward to 2008, 2009. Obviously, Russia went through a bit of a reinvention on the heels of global financial market collapse. Putin had returned for a 3rd term. Oil prices were starting to plunge. And I think a lot of what happened economically, a lot of that growth in the early to mid 2000s was starting to slow down, and the country did start to look more inwardly and start to see, as I said, a reinvention. What were you doing at that time in the late 2000s?
Well, that's a good question. I was still focused on the meat trade, but I was starting to look at other side projects. So, for instance, I invested money in real estate. That was going along gangbusters, really just fabulously. We were making 40% returns until 2008. The Great Recession, unfortunately, had a terrible impact on those investments. But there were other side projects that we were looking at. I became involved in a project to buy some land and try and build a hotel in Montenegro. We were involved in some real estate projects in downtown Moscow. People came to me because I had connections, and we organized sale of some buildings downtown Moscow. So just little things and side projects. But I will say that the meat business was always kind of my central focus. But I will also say that after 2008, it became much more about dispute resolution and less about selling the meat, unfortunately, because we were overexposed. There was a tremendous collapse in 2008, and we had trouble recovering from that. Yeah, I can't get into the details, obviously, but it was a challenging time. And I will also say that we were just about out of the woods in 2013, and I think we would have been just fine with our fabulous performance in 2014, as I already mentioned, if it hadn't been for the political crisis, which really shut us down for good.
But from the late 2000s to perhaps up until 2014, I think there was real growth in CERBA happening at that time. There was expansion to Kazakhstan. There were things happening in Canada, like the Olympics. There was a number of things taking place even after the financial the crisis that happened globally. It felt to me, at least at that time, you became more of a voice in CERBA in that part of your life. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that growth period for you and for CERBA.
Well, that's certainly true. And I've already mentioned we expanded into Vancouver. And I won't take credit for that. Piers Cumberledge deserves credit for that. He met the people there that hired our first regional director, Tatiana Demilovskaya, who's still with us today. She does an excellent job in Vancouver. But I will take credit for Kazakhstan because I traveled there. I traveled there a lot. I made many trips. I visited with people. I hired the first regional director, and I ended up hiring the second one after that. And I found people to serve on the board. And I spent a lot of time and effort into putting together what would later be a viable organization in Kazakhstan. In the beginning, it wasn't. We had some people, even a chapter chair, that was telling me, Nathan, I think we need to shut down in Kazakhstan. It just doesn't make sense. There's not that much Canadian business here. And I didn't. We ended up replacing him as chapter chair, of course. But the Kazakh chapter today, even this year, I'm talking 2021, 2022, has done absolutely fabulously with new members, with expanding their base, expanding the types of projects that they're promoting. Obviously, there's been political turmoil in Kazakhstan this year. We're recovering nicely from that. I would say it's too early to say how that will all pan out. But I would say the CERBA chapter in Kazakhstan is one of our strongest now. It really is. We put together, I can take credit for this, the Canada Kazakhstan Business Council, the KCBC. We call it the Kazakhstan Canada Business Council. And that is a council that just puts together leading government representatives from both countries, from Kazakhstan and Canada, and leading industry representatives for a 2 or 3 day conference where we get together and discuss macroeconomic issues and microeconomic issues, problems in the trade and successes in the trade. And it's an excellent chance to kind of get together and discuss, where we are and where we should be going. And we do that every 2 years. And we're going to do it again this year in 2022. We've been doing it in the even numbers years, and that's a fabulous initiative. So, yes, I started spending more time on CERBA in the 2000s, especially since Chisholm was less focused on selling meat and more focused on dispute resolution. And it really culminated, I would say, in that we have just very recently opened a chapter in Uzbekistan, and I can take partial credit for that, although most of the credit belongs with our friend Alexander Antonov. It was his idea. He used to be the Canadian honorary consul in Uzbekistan. He was for I want to say 19 years, for a long time. He was the honorary consul there. And it was his idea to open a CERBA chapter, and he has really run with that. I supported him. The ambassador at the time, John Kerr, supported him. And now we have a nice functioning chapter in Uzbekistan. So things are moving forward nicely. And yes, I'm proud of what we've been able to do. Yes, I started spending more time on CERBA, I would say, in the 2010s. And I think it has helped the association.
The late 2000s and the early 2010s, that's sort of the birth of Hollywood Hunt, as we call it. You've had some interesting brushes. I've heard stories of you meeting Larry King, Ashton Kutcher, Demi Moore. You started to become larger than life. Can you tell us a bit about those encounters?
I don't know that I'm larger than life, but definitely during the pandemic, I've become larger, yes. I will tell you, I met Larry King at the Soho Rooms Club in Moscow, well known. Was that due to CERBA? Probably, because it was a CERBA guy that invited me there, although I wasn't invited as a CERBA rep. But that made a great impression on me. Boy, I enjoyed talking to him. Him and his lovely wife at the time. I think she was number 5, and I think they're divorced by now. Well, Larry King is not with us anymore. But in any case, it was a wonderful meeting. It was 2010 or 11 or 12, something like that. He was in Moscow for I don't know what reason. He was promoting something, but we had a wonderful talk, and it was one-on-one, and not for an hour, but we talked for 15, 20 minutes about politics and about interviewing and about his style, and he inspired me then. And I'll be honest with you, when I was asked to take this on, it wasn't my idea to be an interviewer for this podcast, IceBreakers. I thought of that. I thought of that conversation with Larry King. I remembered him telling me, and he said it many times, I never learned anything while I was talking. I try and shut up and let the interviewee do all the talking. And I remember him telling me about his styles, how he doesn't pull any punches. In other words, if somebody says something that's kind of awkward or strange, he will call that person immediately. Like, that's funny you would say that because X, And I've tried to make my style like Larry King's. I'm certainly no Larry King, but I was really inspired by that meeting. Demi and Ashton Kutcher were in town. And this was during the final months of their marriage. I think it was a mere 3 months later that they split. But I was the MC for their event. They were having a fundraising event for their charity, which was to help the victims of sex trafficking, underage victims of sex trafficking. Very worthwhile cause. But I unfortunately called Ashton. I pronounced both of their names wrong, and they both called me up. I said Demi Moore, and she says Demi Moore, and I said okay, sorry. And Ashton Kutcher, it's Kutcher, rhymes with butcher. I was like, oh, okay. I don't think I made a good impression on either of them, but we did have some back and forth. I was MC for the evening, and I did speak to them from the stage, and afterwards we went out dancing. So it was a kind of a nice, fun evening. Nice to say I met both of them, but I certainly had a warmer time with Larry King. I'll say that.
So, Nathan,
Yes.
in addition to being responsible for the divorce of Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore, is there anything else that you're not proud of around that time?
Oh, there's a great story there, actually. In the year 2010, I'm almost certain it was 2010, it would have been close to the end of the year, Jean Charest came to town. He was, of course, the premier of Quebec at the time, and he was meeting with the province of Quebec then, and still to this day, has a very close working relationship with the city of Moscow. Not the government of Russia. Of course, Quebec does things with Russia, but they have a special working relationship with specifically the municipal government of Moscow. And Jean Charest met with Yuri Luzhkov, who was mayor of Moscow at the time and rumored to be a presidential candidate before, 10 years earlier. At this time, there was no discussion of him as president. But in any case, we had a dinner for Jean Charest, and afterwards, we had a 4-way discussion where Charest was standing. We were in the middle of the hall talking to Yuri Luzhkov, and there was a translator, and there was me. So there was a little diamond there. And Jean Charest would say something in French, and Yuri Luzhkov would answer in Russian, and the translator would translate everything between Russian and French. My greatest shame, everything to do with CERBA, the greatest, I think, drawback, minus that I have in my character is that I can't speak French. I've taken it, and I can understand 100 words, and if you give me a text, I will understand 1/3 of it. If you speak, I will understand 1/8 of it. It's my greatest shame of my life. And I'm still trying, you won't believe this, but I'm actually signed up to a French class this year. I'm going to try and fix it. But in any case, I didn't have to speak French because I do speak Russian. And I could understand everything the translator was saying in Russian. So I understood the whole conversation. I could nod my heads at the proper time. And I wasn't really contributing at all. I was simply listening to Jean Charest converse with Mayor of Moscow, Luzhkov. And at one point, Charest turned to me and said something in French. And the translator was silent. Because Charest's talking to his own guy now. The translator didn't say anything. And there was this very uncomfortable pause. and I think I probably remembered what Larry King said to me, and I just called it out. I said, okay, let's be honest here. The president of the Canadian Business Association in Russia doesn't speak French. I apologize, Premier Charest, but you're going to have to say that in English. And he started laughing. He was so gracious about it. He started laughing, and he hit his knee with his hand. He said, this whole time you haven't understood a word that we've been saying? And I said, no, I understand the Russian. I said, I do understand the Russian. I have been following the conversation. I haven't been nodding blindly, at the things you say. And he was so gracious about that. Of course, he switched into English, no problem. I don't think he said a word of French for the rest of the conversation. And afterwards, I'll never forget this. I got a thank you note from the Quebec government. It was their formal, their standard thank you note. It was a 2-line thank you note, all obviously in French because it came from the Quebec government, thanking me for my participation while Premier Charest had been in Moscow. Charest, in his own hand, translated this 2-line note into English. In his own hand, I swear to God, and he signed it Jean at the bottom. And I thought, what a classy move. This guy could have been insulted. I wasn't, culturally sensitive, whatever. And he just made a wonderful, say what you want about his politics. Maybe you like him, maybe you don't. But I think as an individual, he's a great person.
So reinvention around 2014, 2015, arguably Russia went through another reinvention. Sochi happened. Russia was put on the world stage as very much a host and a hero in some ways. And then the incursion into Ukraine happened and sanctions took place. Russia started to turn more inward, spike domestic production, look for new allies. There really was a reinvention on the domestic and the international front. What was happening with you at that time?
Well, I can tell you I became more involved than ever, I would say, with CERBA, because CERBA needed involvement of dedicated individuals at that time. There was a time in 2015, we were wondering if we were going to survive. We were wondering, many companies left, many companies shut down, and we saw membership drop in all of the chapters in that year in 2015. I gave speeches in which, we try not to be political, and because we are an apolitical organization. But there's some things you can't not talk about. And we simply espoused in my speeches the association's view that it is better to continue engagement. It is better, even when there are disputes, even when there are very serious disputes. We don't want to gloss over anything. Very serious disagreements between the West and Russia. I think that Russia is right in some ways, but I think Russia is very, very wrong in some ways. But the point is that we need to continue engagement. Cutting off contacts, cutting off trade, cutting off discussion, that's not the right way to go forward. The best way to go forward, if you want to influence somebody, is to continue engagement. That was our theme throughout 2015. And by 2016, we saw stability, not because of that theme, perhaps, but the market, we began to get a different type of CERBA member. People perhaps with less stars in their eyes, but people that still saw the potential for business here. It was you, Alex, and I'll give you credit for this, that coined the expression, Russia, a lousy place to do business, a great place to make money. And a lot of companies...
That's funny.
Yeah, you coined that in 2011. You get credit for that, although we all take credit for it these days. But in any case, that was the theme of our first investment conference, if you recall.
I do. So 2015-16, where things stabilized and there were new opportunities for Canadian companies in Eurasia.
Yes, and we got a different type of kind of no-nonsense company. We obviously have to be apolitical. Companies are coming to the market just because there's a market here, not because they're thrilled or excited about the political situation, the political landscape. I won't name names because sometimes people don't want to be named in these, but we've had major food producers come to Russia and even break ground on large production facilities. We have had aircraft producers come and do a fabulous business selling regional aircraft, even though Bombardier divested of its regional aircraft business. The company that took over, Viking Air and de Havilland together, are still doing a very nice business. And it's not just Russia, by the way. They're doing a fabulous business in Uzbekistan, in Kazakhstan, and all over the region. So there's a new type of company here. They're no-nonsense companies. They know what they need, and they focus on that. BRP is an example. I said I wouldn't name companies, but I assume they wouldn't mind being named. They're selling ski-doos and sea-doos hand over fist. They're doing a fabulous business, and they took control of it. They used to do it all through a distributor. Now they took control of it themselves, and they're doing a fabulous job. Robert Prasinski manages the operation up in St. Petersburg. I couldn't imagine a more dedicated and competent individual to run that business. He's doing a great job.
So by this point, it sounds to me like you are more involved in almost like a government relations role. Interestingly, it's almost a full circle 20 years back to what you had been doing 30 years back to what you had been doing with the USMEF. You were facilitating the almost like a macro business growth across different markets with some private enterprise. But to me, at that point, you took on more of a public role than ever before. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, perhaps, I don't know what you mean. I have been more public, although I'm very guarded in my comments to the press. This is a story that's worth telling. We were at a bar in 2010, I'm going to say, or maybe it was 11. And we were just talking off the cuff about how, I remember when it was 2011, because we were talking about the 40th anniversary of the great Super Series, the 1972 Super Series, that would be next year, 2012. And we were talking about how to market and what activities we could do. And we could do this, and we talked about having focus groups, and we talked about having, parties, obviously, and receptions. And somebody said, you know what we should do? We should get Prime Minister Harper out on the ice with President Putin, one-on-one. And we all laughed, and we were drinking beer. It was a bunch of hockey. We were the hockey team. And we laughed about that, and we said, that would be brilliant. And we were taking notes, and we were brainstorming, It was about 3 weeks later that the Toronto Star, on the front page, ran an article saying that President Harper, or Prime Minister Harper, would soon be facing off on the ice with President Putin. And the article quoted me. Because there had been a journalist in our midst. This was just a stupid, drunken idea that somebody off the cuff threw out there, and suddenly it's on the front page of the Toronto Star. I got a call from the ambassador. I was in California at the time. We had just returned from Hawaii with the family. I remember getting a call like at 5 a.m. from the ambassador, from Ambassador John Sloan at the time. Says, I got a call from the Prime Minister's office. They want to know what's going on here. I couldn't believe it. I got a copy of the article, and my jaw dropped. I called the Prime Minister's office. I spoke to them. I told them the true story. This was just a drunken brainstorming session. And by God, one of the guys sitting there was a journalist. I called him, by the way. I had his number, and I called him. I said, are you crazy to print that? He says, hey, I'm a journalist, and that's my job. I print it the way I hear it. And I said, well, you should have mentioned that it was a drunken brainstorming session and not, confirmed by the governments, neither the government of Canada nor the government of Russia. So anyway, that's a long way of saying you got to be careful what you say around the press. You talked about me as a government leader. I can tell you I'm very guarded in anything I say in a public forum. I always assume, by the way, when I'm speaking one-on-one, I assume that whatever I'm saying can be recorded, will be recorded, may be used against you in a court of law, whatever. You have to be sincere in your comments, and you have to be guarded. I have spoken on behalf of Canadian business. I've never spoken on behalf of the Canadian government. Very recently, by the way, we had a press conference to talk about the recognition of vaccines for tourist purposes. The Russians officially don't recognize Western vaccines, and Canada and the US don't recognize the Russian vaccine. So Russian tourists can't travel to Canada, and Western tourists, they actually can. They found a way around it, but they have other problems because of non-recognition. So we had a press conference where we talked about the need to recognize each other's vaccines, at least for travel purposes. And I took great pain to mention at that conference that I'm not a spokesman of the Canadian government. I'm speaking on behalf of the Canadian business community. So I'm guarded. I'm careful in what I say. Yes, I think I've been a voice of Canadian business. No, I don't think I've been a voice of the Canadian government in the time. If anything, we have simply conveyed our concerns and our wishes to the Canadian government, and we've gotten great support from them. I appreciate very much what Government Affairs Canada has done for us. The embassy has been supportive, but obviously all to a limit, because there are very serious disputes and differences between Canada's worldviews and Russia's worldviews. We don't have the same problems in Kazakhstan, by the way. We don't have the same problems in Uzbekistan. More or less politically, we're on the same wavelength. But in Russia, there are serious problems, and we don't gloss them over. They exist, and we need to recognize them, and they need to be resolved. But that doesn't mean that business has to stop. Business can march forward. And in fact, the greater business contacts there are between Canada and Russia, the greater the likelihood that we will find a resolution to these issues, even as they seem to be coming to a head.
So business diplomacy, if you will.
I would say so. But never on behalf of the Canadian government, however. Always on behalf of CERBA.
So this is a good segue as we get into 2020 and the next reinvention, not just for Russia, globally, as COVID set on. A few things are happening. Putin was reelected again. There were constitutional reforms that pretty much ensured a continuation of the current administration for a long time to come. Obviously, COVID changed everything about behavior. There was the end of the Trump administration. Vaccine politics set on, as you just made mention to. Russia started to reassert itself a little bit more internationally. And in the context of CERBA, there were differing opinions and policies on what COVID is. And can you talk a little bit about what you were doing at the time, the reality of business across multiple nations that have different policies, and whatever challenges and opportunities that happened around that time?
The pandemic did not help business. All business across the board was hurt by the pandemic, except maybe e-business, e-commerce was certainly helped by it. Delivery services were helped by it. But I will tell you that it certainly helped calm down the political disputes, the political tension between all countries of the world, and that includes Canada and Russia. Why? Because we found a common enemy. We found something to discuss that we all faced. In any case, COVID gave us a reason to be united. And not just COVID. I will also say COP26, focus on the planet, focus on greenhouse emissions, on carbon credits, on carbon index, on being green, on improving the planet. If that was perhaps a side thought through most of the 2000s and the 2010s, it came firmly into the forefront in 2021. And Russia has joined that bandwagon. Although Russia, in the beginning, they denied climate change. They said this is not a real thing. It's just seasonal. And in the middle, Russia was saying, well, we now recognize that climate change is real. Yes, it's probably man-made, but why should Russia? Why should we be concerned about that as a northern nation? That's even better for us. And of course, that's not true. And now the position of the Russian government is very much in line with that of other Western governments. That this is truly a serious problem. The melting of the permafrost could have catastrophic consequences worldwide. And Russia sent one of the largest delegations of any nation. I believe of all the attendees, they were number 5. They sent 312 people, I think, to COP26. And it was another reason to find common ground. We heard the national conventions. The British have a convention they do every year called Russia Talk, where the ambassador gives a speech, and the Americans have an investment conference every year where the American ambassador gives a speech. Those have historically, for the last 5 years, been very political, very, I would say, negative. And this year, for the first year, we were hearing from everybody, hey, we have common ground. We need to fight COVID. We need to fight climate change. We need to come together and find ways to resolve these issues. And the Russians were on board. So it's a real tragedy that we seem to be crashing towards another confrontation. As I say, who knows where this will all lead? As of February 1st, it looks very ominous, but we'll see how it all ends.
Right. So today is February 2nd, actually. So today's date is a funny date.
Good point.
Today's 2/2/22. The date is 2/2/22. A fabulous date for us to be recording this. And once again, on 2/2/22, we find Russia poised to reinvent itself, possibly reinvent Europe's political geography. Who knows what will happen? As we sit here on 2/2/22, what do you think the future holds for you, Nathan Hunt?
Well, I can tell you, I just spouted off for a minute or two about climate change. There's a new project that I'm very excited about. It's partly Canadian, involving making agricultural enterprises more green, involving taking greenhouse gases away out of the farm. Manure is a serious source of greenhouse gases. How do you say this politely on the air? Cow farts. I don't know how to say that politely, but that's another serious problem. And there are solutions that have been developed by American companies with some Canadian investment. There's a project I'm very seriously interested in, and I'm excited about it. I'll tell you, so that's something I may be doing. A second area that's excited me is the possibility of export of meat from Russia. For many, many years, all we did was import. Russian meat is in demand in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, in China. So there's great potential for export of Russian meat. They've been doing it for 10 years already, and I've been trying to find a toehold, and I think I may have found one. So we'll see if that is something that can play out. I'm excited about the future. We'll see where everything goes. I still have the Montenegro project. We have actually a movie project that might go forward. So there are all sorts of exciting things happening. We'll see what the future holds.
Wait a minute. So tell me about this movie project, Hollywood Hunt.
Well, I don't think I'm authorized to talk about it publicly, but we did write a script about an American military hero, the founder of the American Navy. I guess I'll go ahead and name him John Paul Jones, who has an astounding history. And we got the Russians to be our partners in this. The largest Russian media company is Gazprom Media. And they are partners with this. They're putting up half of the money, and we have gone to the market. And we've been hurt by the pandemic. Unfortunately, nobody likes to do big, expensive. Sea battles are expensive, and nobody likes a big, expensive project when the pandemic is raging. So we're kind of waiting for things to cool off. But we have commissioned a top-rate Hollywood writer, a guy with a name who's written many other movies and series, and he wrote a fabulous pilot. And we're looking to take that to the market. And this is an hour and a half discussion, but I'll get straight to the point. Why are the Russians interested? Because nobody knows that even though John Paul Jones did found the American Navy, afterwards he left and he became an admiral in the Russian Navy. He served Catherine the Great for several years. He was never an admiral for the Americans, by the way. He wanted that title, and it was considered too bourgeoisie. They said, we won't give you the title of admiral. That's something that won't exist in our Navy. He did get that distinction from Catherine, what he wanted. And again, this is an hour and a half story, but suffice it to say, it's a great story that has elements for positive elements for both Russia and for the USA and for joint East-West friendship in it.
It's interesting you talk about film, and I'll tell you why. Maybe I'll end on this thought as the next great chapter in I think reinvention and quite possibly your career. There's an adage which talks to market development and growth. I'm a soldier so that my son can be a farmer, so that his son can be a poet. And it talks about first planting a flag, arriving somewhere, then developing an infrastructure and growing that, so that then eventually you can pursue arts. So it sounds to me, Nathan, like your career and the reinvention around you is taking the sort of next logical step around the arts. We were soldiers, we were farmers, but now we're going to be poets.
Very, very interesting you say that John Adams said that, and he's one of my favorite political personalities of all times. If you've read his biography, fabulous individual. But yes, I would agree with that. I earned money so I can maybe do something useful for the world, and maybe this movie project will be a cultural contribution. We'll see if it takes off.
Nathan, quick question. What made you a leader?
I can answer that in 2 words. Boy Scouts. I was a scout growing up. I was an Eagle Scout. I had a fabulous scoutmaster who inspired me, who challenged me, who actually punished me when I didn't do well. And he talked all the time about leadership and what it means to be a leader. And he said, leaders are the ones that are going to change the world. Don't be a follower, be a leader. And it was very much the Boy Scouts. My brother is still a leader in the Boy Scouts in the USA. I unfortunately have not had the chance to get involved here in Russia, but I love that organization.
Of the Boy Scout badges that you've earned, which is your favorite?
Environmental science. Although astronomy also. I liked environmental science because it was about climate change. I was just interested in that at an early age. But astronomy also, I have a personal love for astronomy. Even when I was 10 years old, I learned all the constellations in the sky. I can tell you the names of the stars, and I can find the planets. So that was a matter of pride and excitement for me. When I went to university, I even took an astronomy course. But one of those two, I don't know.
Well, listen, Nathan, it's been fascinating talking to you. I'm proud to have been your friend for 25 years, and I hope to be a friend for another 25. At which point I will stop being your friend at 25 more. That's when we're done. I have it in my calendar.
Okay. Okay. I'll put it in my calendar too. I don't want to miss that.
Thank you. It's been great, and I look forward to hearing about the new project. I'm sure it'll be an exciting watch for everybody. Thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. You've been listening to IceBreakers, the podcast produced by CERBA, a nonprofit business association supporting trade, investment, and good relations between Canada and the countries of Eurasia. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can join our LinkedIn group to send questions to guests and find more information about the podcast series in general on our website at www.serbanet.org. Thanks for tuning in.